The little diner was almost empty that late afternoon when the door creaked open and a man stepped inside. He wore now boots that had seen too many miles and a faded hat pulled low against the sun. Dust clung to his clothes, and the lines on his face told stories of hard days and lonely nights. To most, he was invisible, just another stranger drifting through town on his way to nowhere. But Clara noticed. She always did. Clara was tired, her apron stained from a long shift, but she still greeted him with a gentle smile. Life hadn't been kind to her. Business was slow, bills were piling up. But kindness was something she refused to give up on. She poured him a hot cup of coffee, the steam rising like a small comfort against the silence. He nodded his thanks but said little, his eyes fixed on the dark liquid as though it held the answers he had been searching for. Around them the diner hummed softly, the squeak of a ceiling fan, the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen. But between the two of them was a quiet connection. Clara saw only a weary traveler, maybe hungry, maybe lost, and she treated him the way she believed every person deserved to be treated, with dignity. She didn't ask where he came from or where he was going. She didn't look at his boots or the dust on his shirt. She simply set the cup down in front of him and said, "Coffee's on the house." In that small act, unnoticed by anyone else, something shifted inside the man. For the first time in years he felt seen, not for what he owned or what he had lost, but for who he was in that very moment. The man had barely touched the sand which he ordered, picking at it without much appetite. Clara, watching from behind the counter, felt a tug in her heart. He looked like someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, someone who hadn't tasted warmth in a long time. Quietly, without a word, she cut a thick slice of pie-apple, his kind of pie, she just knew, and slid it onto his plate before he could protest. When he looked up, confused, she only smiled and said, "Everyone deserves a little sweetness." Her voice was gentle, but it carried a truth that sank deeper than either of them expected. She turned away as if it was nothing, as if kindness were just part of the routine, but for him it was everything. The cowboy froze, fork suspended above the plate. For years he had lived surrounded by people who wanted something from him, his land, his wealth, his influence. But this was different. This was simple, selfless, and real. He took a bite, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the food didn't just fill his stomach, it reached his soul. His weathered eyes softened, and he glanced at Clara, almost as if to ask why. But she was busy wiping down a counter, humming to herself, as if giving away kindness was as natural as breathing. He realized in that quiet moment that he had been starving for something far greater than food. He had been starving for human warmth, for the kind of compassion money couldn't buy. And in that little diner, over a slice of pie he hadn't asked for, he felt the first spark of hope return to his heart. As the sun dipped low and the diner's neon sign buzzed to life, the cowboy rose to leave. In his quiet shuffle toward the door, his wallet slipped from his coat pocket and landed on the floor with a soft thud. Clara hurried over, bending to pick it up before he could. When she handed it back, the wallet fell open just slightly, and for a fleeting second, she caught a glimpse inside. There, tucked behind the leather folds, was an emblem, an engraved crest she recognized instantly. Her father used to talk about it when she was a child, the Whitlock family ranch. It wasn't just a ranch, but an empire, stretching across counties, half the state under its name. She blinked in disbelief, her gaze snapping back to the man before her. This wasn't just some drifter in dusty boots. This was James Whitlock. Her lips parted, as though she wanted to ask him why a man like him was sitting in her diner, eating pie like he had nothing in the world. But before she could form the words, James let out a weary sigh, the kind that seemed to come from years of carrying a heavy burden. "You recognize it, don't you?" he asked quietly, his voice low, almost resigned. Clara nodded slowly, still unsure what to say. He slipped the wallet back into his pocket and looked down, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. All the land in the world doesn't mean much when your heart's been empty for years. The weight of his confession lingered in the air. For the first time, Clara saw not the legend, not the wealth, but the loneliness etched into the man himself. a loneliness deeper than dust and silence. Clara didn't look away after his confession. Most people might have pressed him with questions about his fortune, his ranch, his name. But she saw something else, the heaviness in his eyes, the hollowness in his voice. She slid back into the booth across from him, setting down a fresh pot of coffee as though it were an invitation to speak, not about business or wealth, but about what truly mattered. "You know," she said softly, pouring into his cup, "love doesn't disappear forever. Sometimes it just hides, waiting for someone brave enough to believe in it again." James stared at her, the words almost foreign to him. For years, people had spoken to him about deals, inheritances, power, never about love. Her kindness, her steady belief, began to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. He felt something stir, something long buried. The silence between them shifted. Slowly, stories began to spill out. Memories of the ranch when he was young, of horses he'd raised, of the laughter he once knew but hadn't heard in decades. Clara listened with genuine interest, nodding, smiling, never once treating him as the powerful Whitlock, but simply as a man who needed to be heard. And then it happened. A low chuckle escaped his lips, surprising even him. Clara's eyes lit up, and she teased him gently, coaxing more. Before long, he was laughing. Full, unrestrained, the kind of laugh he thought he'd lost forever. The sound filled the quiet diner like a long, awaited song. In that simple moment, over endless refills of coffee and the warmth of her presence, James Whitlock began to feel alive again. For the first time in decades, the emptiness inside him didn't feel so vast. The next morning, the diner opened as usual, sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. Clara moved about, unaware of the quiet arrangements James had made before dawn. When the bank manager stopped by later with unexpected news, her breath caught. Her debts were cleared, every last cent. The diner she had fought so hard to keep alive was safe. She stood frozen, tears stinging her eyes, knowing exactly who had done it. James returned that afternoon, boots dusty as ever, hat tilted low. He didn't boast about what he had done. Instead, he left only a small folded note on the counter that read, "Thank you for reminding me what truly matters." Clara met his gaze, and though words felt small, the gratitude in her smile said enough. When he turned to leave, she called after him, "Come back someday. Coffee's on the house." For a moment, the hardened cowboy paused at the door. His lips curved into the faintest smile, and in his eyes there was something new, something he thought he had lost forever, hope. As he stepped into the fading light, Clara knew he had given her more than financial freedom. He had given her the gift of believing in miracles again, and she, without even trying, had given him something far greater, a reason to believe in love. Sometimes the richest hearts wear the dustiest boots, and a single act of kindness can awaken love that's been asleep for years. In the end, what began as a simple encounter between a weary cowboy and a small-town waitress became something far greater, a reminder that kindness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Clara never judged James by his worn boots or his silence. She saw him simply as a man in need of warmth. And James, who carried wealth beyond measure, but a heart starved of love, found in Clara's quiet compassion the spark he thought was lost forever. Their meeting proved that true richness isn't found in land or fortune, but in the simple, selfless acts that touch the soul. Sometimes it only takes a smile, a slice of pie, or a listening ear to change the course of someone's life. And in that diner, beneath the hum of old lights and the scent of fresh coffee, two lonely hearts discovered that love, no matter how long it sleeps, can always be awakened again.